So, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar on demand and supply side support mechanism for clean cooking in displacement setting. My name is Swanisha Basnet, and today I'll be your moderator for this webinar. This webinar is organized jointly by GIZ, UNHCR, NDEF, UNITA GPA, and MEX, and is part of an ongoing webinar series. Last few weeks, we talked about, within this webinar series, we talked about market-based approach, where we dived into why market-based approach, what are the socioeconomic assessment needed for market-based, and with a case study on cash-based interventions. In case you haven't joined us for the earlier webinar, I do encourage you to check out the recordings and the materials from the past webinar. The link to that is dropped in the chat. And the webinar from today is also going to be recorded, and the materials from today will be available in the chat. So let's go to the house rules for today. As usual, we'll be taking your questions during the entire presentations. So please do tell us to whom the question is addressed to, and then we will pass them to the respective speakers during the Q&A round. And if you are using a laptop, then on the right side of your screen, there is a control bar where you see a question panel. In case you don't see that, please click on the orange icon and the question will pop up. And if in case you are using a tablet or a mobile device, then please look for the Q icon in your device. And we look forward to receiving all your questions during the webinar. So let's have a quick look at today's agenda. We have a stellar lineup of speakers addressing different topics today. So we will kickstart with an overview presentation on the different types of de-risking mechanisms that are available out there for supporting the clean cooking interventions. And then we will have two video input from private sector going into detail about which kind of de-risking mechanisms are successful or unsuccessful from the private sector perspective. And then we have two case studies, one focusing on end user intervention and the second focusing on supply side intervention. So without further ado, let's kickstart this webinar with the first poll. So since the webinar is about de-risking mechanism, I'm going to first launch the poll in your screen. So since it's about de-risking mechanism, please do use the poll that is on your screen to tell us which of these following options do you think are most successful de-risking mechanisms. Is it grants, subsidy? Is it more low interest rates, reserve-based financing, end-user financing, or others? And in case you have others, in case you choose others, please also do type in the chat and let us know what do you mean by others kind of funding. So you can use the same question box to also send us your answers. We really look forward to knowing more about your answers. So let's leave the poll another 10-15 seconds as the answers are coming in. So this is your last chance to vote. As in a few seconds, I will now close the poll and display the results. So we have a majority who says end user financing, we have a clear winner, that is reserve-based financing, followed by end user financing. Thank you again for voting during the poll. And now let's kickstart with our first presenter, who is now going to give us an overview on these different, some of these options, and also provide an overview on the different de-risking mechanism. So I would like to welcome Mr. Colin Fay from Clean Cooking Alliance, who is the Senior Director of Market Strengthening. So Colin, I'm going to send you a request to share your screen so that you could proceed with your presentation.
Great, thanks, Swanisha.
So you should have a request on your screen now.
Just thinking about it.
So we are not able to see your screen as of now. If you could accept it.
There we go. Okay, you should be able to see my screen.
Yes.
Great. Great. Well, thanks so much, Ranisha. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to share a little bit of an overview of some of the de-risking mechanisms which might be relevant for displacement settings. Was pleased to see there seems to be quite a bit of knowledge already in the audience when it comes to things like results-based financing and end-user subsidies, which we'll talk about. So that's good. But I wanted to just start with results-based financing. And this is a topic that was touched on in the previous webinar. It's being used in a variety of scenarios, including displacement settings. I think we'll maybe hear a little bit more later from some of the experiences in Kakuma refugee camp. But I wanted to give a broader overview of these models and how they work. So the results-based financing really, is at the forefront of financing innovation for the clean cooking sector, and it's something that we're very interested in at the Clean Cooking Alliance. We are in the process of launching a results-based financing accelerator to really try and concentrate knowledge and expertise on how to design effective RBF programs. But just to give you an overview of the mechanism, in the RBF approach, we have an external payer, or sometimes we refer to them as an outcome buyer. And that payer defines the results that they want to achieve with a specific program and the associated targets. So they would set define the results they would want to achieve in terms of the number of cook stoves distributed, or maybe thinking about paying for specific outcomes or impacts related to health, for example, or gender. Once those targets are defined, then they enter into a contract with an enterprise or an implementing organization to deliver those results. And to some extent, the payer doesn't really care that much how the results are achieved, as long as they are achieved, and it's the results that determine the payment. So an implementing organization or an enterprise goes ahead and distributes those clean cooking products. There is independent verification that those are real products, real stoves in this case, that are being distributed to the target households, and that all of the criteria that are set by the payer are being met. And once that verification is achieved, then payment is dispersed to the clean cooking enterprise or the implementer. So the great thing about RBF programs is it's very clear on the what. There is significant upfront effort invested in defining what are the specific results, what are the specific targets in terms of the number of households, the number of products, etc. And very flexible then on how that's achieved, which really creates the incentive for implementers to innovate, and those implementers are free to innovate, to modify their program, to be agile, to be adaptive to the conditions, as long as they're achieving the results. The payments are made based on those results. And so there's some examples of those include the SE for All Universal Energy Facility and the World Bank Clean Cooking Fund, which is getting up and running in Rwanda. In terms of the opportunities and the risks, then subsidizing clean cooking distributors, which is essentially what this is. It's a supply side subsidy to distributors to really build market infrastructure, or to enter into markets that may not be immediately profitable. So this makes it a good tool to increase the supply of, in this case, clean cooking products in maybe rural locations or in displacement settings where the market incentives may not exist for companies to do that on their own. As I mentioned, distributors are incentivized to innovate, to learn, and to find efficiencies that maximize the outputs, because if they can figure out a way to achieve these targets more cost effectively, then that savings is something that they retain. There's a contract in place that says you get X amount for each stove distributed. If you're able to lower your cost to do that, then you keep the difference essentially. So there's an inbuilt incentive for these companies to learn, to find efficiencies, to innovate. It's also suitable for highly uncertain contexts. RBF programs can be designed to have upfront payments involved, where maybe there's more uncertainty about the market, how you access that market. In more predictable scenarios, then maybe an RBF program looks more like a single payment once the result is achieved. So there's some flexibility in the design here to balance upfront payments versus results-based payments, and so it can be very useful in uncertain contexts. And of course, that inbuilt incentive to learn, to adapt, is something that is often, if not always, necessary for contexts that are highly uncertain. RBF tools support short-term priorities in terms of it creates that incentive for companies to enter these markets quickly, but also then can be used in a strategic way to ensure that longer-term objectives are being met. So for example, building out distribution infrastructure over time, etc. So it could be really interesting and useful in making the shift from an initial emergency style response to a more steady state or long-term support in the future. So again, something that might be quite appropriate for displacement settings. There are some risks involved, of course. There's the cost of monitoring and verifying results can be quite high, and that's where a lot of a results-based financing program hinges on. I mentioned RBF programs talking about delivering X number of cook stoves or reaching X number of households. That can sometimes create perverse incentives if RBFs are based purely on delivering outputs, because then the incentive becomes to just get as many cook stoves in as many households as possible. I think what we're seeing is a little bit of a shift towards RBFs being based on outcomes, so that the implementers involved need to ensure that those stoves are being used and that they are actually displacing the use of polluting fuels, rather than just being a distribution problem. Clean cooking distributors may, of course, not have the financial or the technical capacity to build the inventory and deliver the outputs. What we're talking about here is a clean cooking company that is receiving a payment for product distributed, but they're not receiving that at the time where they need to deliver it. So one of the challenges for companies here is assembling the working capital to be able to bridge between when they incur their costs and when those RBF payments are received. And then finally, without having that sort of long-term demand for clean cooking in these markets, there's a risk that those distributors may just exit when financing is withdrawn, and that there isn't the sustainable supply in the market to keep those companies incentivized to be there. We just recently released a report on design principles for clean cooking RBFs that folks might be interested in. You can find that at cleancooking.org, and I think that link is also going to be in the chat. I wanted to move on then to carbon finance, which in some ways is a variation on results-based financing, and I just wanted to kind of talk through that approach quickly. In the carbon financing model, a standards agency is there to define the outcomes. It defines a methodology and how to calculate, in this case, a unit of carbon emission reductions. A clean cooking implementing organization then submits a program of activities that outlines a project, and once that's approved, proceeds to distribute stoves. And those stoves then over time generate carbon credits that are independently verified, again in a similar way to to the results-based financing model. One of the big differences, of course, is that those units of impact, or those credits, are sold on an open market via a broker, and so you don't have a single identified payer. In most cases for carbon programs, although you can, but most often they're sold on the open market via a broker, and then payment again is dispersed to the implementing organization. So again, it's very similar to an RBF, except the results are defined in terms of a specific unit of impact, and those impacts are traded on the market. Again, thinking about opportunities and risks, there is a significant amount of financing coming into the clean cooking sector with the current high price of carbon credits. Our industry snapshot report, which we release every year, this year reported a 21-fold increase in carbon financing in the clean cooking sector from 2017 to 2020. And we expect that to increase further. When carbon financing is used to subsidize prices, that may directly increase demand for clean cooking, as well as providing a subsidy on the supply side. And then we're seeing much more modern energy cooking solutions that are able to provide low-cost real-time usage data, which is addressing some of the verification transaction costs involved in carbon programs. So I think as we see more of those modern solutions that have connectivity built in and are able to provide that real-time data, then the cost of administering programs like this will go down. That's one of the big risks, of course, is the transaction costs are quite high for applying for that program of activities and getting it approved. And that's especially difficult and prohibitive for smaller enterprises and distributors, where you don't have the economies of scale to justify those transaction costs. So one of the things that many organizations are looking at is how do we build systems and tools that can reduce those transaction costs. Again, like with RBFs, there's often a lack of working capital that can pre-finance carbon revenues that may not be recognized for several years. And so we need more of that kind of financing to come into the clean cooking sector to enable more companies to participate in these programs. And then, as with RBF programs, verification is a costly and often a manual process for those non-connected clean cooking solutions.
Colm, just to let
Yes.
you know, we have another 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay, I will speed through this section. So, of course, I wanted to cover grants and technical assistance. It's a very common tool for supporting the supply side, helping companies to build new capabilities or develop new infrastructure or develop new products for specific market needs. These are very simple to administer, which is one of the benefits, and they can be used to support a wide range of activities, and often those that don't directly generate revenue for the enterprise that might be otherwise hard to fund. So those building that infrastructure, building the capabilities of the organization to allow them to improve their ability to operate in the future. Often that's difficult stuff to find funding for if it's not directly related to revenue. The risks are that they can be designed around what donors want and funders want, rather than what's needed by the company or the target market. That's something that's always a risk with this type of support, and it's not linked directly to any specific outcomes or outputs. So ensuring that it delivers results can sometimes be complex, and the cost of engaging in the reporting and the administration, while it's maybe simple on the supply side, it can often be high for enterprises and funders as well. Going quickly to demand side subsidies, then end user subsidies are subsidies that are directly provided to users to address the affordability gap and reduce the price of products. It can come in the form of direct cash transfers, which I think was touched on in the last webinar, or maybe come in the form of a voucher or just a decrease in the product price. But that can also be up to 100% discount. We've seen, again, with the use of carbon funding, quite an increase in free distribution of stoves, with all of that carbon funding coming into the space. It provides access to clean technologies for low-income populations, which of course is the huge benefit of end-user subsidies, and can exist alongside traditional retail models. If the subsidies are designed correctly, it can exist alongside models that serve higher income consumers. It can be the starting point for changing behavior and building demand for clean cooking in the future, if used correctly as part of developing sustainable markets. And then those vouchers or other mechanisms can be used to provide consumers with agency and choice and the ability to engage in a market. There are some big risks associated with subsidies. They may benefit high-income households, but if we don't have precise targeting. Willingness to pay for the solutions for clean cooking may be reduced, and market dynamics might be distorted if those subsidies are not deployed in a smart way. Subsidized technologies and fuels may leak into adjacent markets. We've seen scenarios where those products leak across borders, or maybe are used for purposes other than clean cooking. And then overall, just a lower value may be placed on clean cooking solutions, especially if the purpose of that subsidy isn't clear. And so I think there's important principles to bear in mind around how the purpose of a subsidy is communicated to the entire population. So it's understood that these are subsidies to achieve specific outcomes, rather than just a wholesale reduction in the price and a reduction in the value of those products. I'll leave it there, and happy to take any questions at the end. But yeah, over to you, Ranisha.
Thank you so much, Colm. So I'll quickly switch back to my screen. So thank you so much again. And now we'll go and have a look at the two video inputs from two companies. So here I have video input from Rebecca, who is a senior program manager from ILF Uganda, International Life Fund Uganda, and Justin Miller, who is the business development manager at Sunken Limited, Kenya. So since these both are video inputs, in case the volume is a bit low, please turn off the volume. And please allow a few seconds for the video input to play on your screen.
Thank you very much. I'm called Apicha Rebecca. I work as the Senior Program Manager with International Lifeline Fund for their environment program in Uganda. Lifeline was founded in 2003, and we have worked in a couple of countries in East Africa, Uganda being one of them. We have programs in water and environment, and under the environment program, we are basically doing production and distribution of fuel-efficient cookstoves for household and institutional customers. Recently, we have also started doing solar nanogrids in displacement settings within Uganda. Looking at long-term solutions and sustainability, market-based de-risking mechanisms are definitely the way to go. For example, the result-based financings or the carbon financings. In this way, there is not much that is actually needed for the private sector to qualify for such incentives. For example, the result-based financing, as it's entirely tied to the number of sales that are coming back from the fields. So basically, if we are able to leverage the result-based financings in an attractive way that can actually be business or can actually make business sense for the private sector, this is going to be the way that we are going to triumph as a sector in increasing accessibility to the energy solutions in the displacement settings. Because definitely, if we are just looking at the NGOs, with time, NGOs close and they move to the next operations. But when the private sector has taken over and there is a demand and a supply chain, this is definitely a way that we are going to be able to achieve sustainable solutions to the accessibility of energy solutions in the displacement setting. Some of the challenges that we have seen with these market-based de-risking mechanisms is basically that you need user data for you to be able to earn these incentives. However, in the refugee settings, not very many people are actually willing to give you their personal information. And this is attributed to security reasons or culture reasons and so forth. So then it becomes very hard for you as a private sector to achieve your targets with such shortcomings. And then the other challenge that we have also seen is the inadequate coordination between donors, in that there are some mechanisms that are encouraging free distribution approaches, and the others are encouraging market-based approaches. It becomes very challenging to have these two approaches that are contradicting in the same location or refugee camp. Yeah, thank you so much. You can reach me out on the contact information.
Hello, my name is Justice Miller, a business development manager with Sunken Limited. Sunken Limited is a manufacturer of energy-saving cookstoves in the markets of Turkana County. Currently, we have our operations located in Kakuma, where we produce the cookstoves for the Kakuma market and the refugee camp and also the host community. Some of the most successful de-risking mechanisms that have supported our venture in capital and helped us penetrate in this market of Turkana are the grants from the ACF, the low interest loans from Kenya Climate Ventures, the technical supports from also Kenya Climate Ventures. Venturing in a marginalized region is a very expensive affair. This financial support go a long way in helping us cover some of the costs such as training of staff, which is a very expensive affair, marketing, and also increasing our production or scaling up the business. The technical assistance we have received from the likes of Kenya Climate Ventures, the ACF grant, and also the Siemens Foundation have helped us in identifying the gaps that we need to fill in the market and also in the business as a whole. These technical assistance support help go a long way in putting the right structures for the business in order to thrive at the long term. For business to thrive in a very marginalized region such as Turkana, a lot of financial support is required. Commercial banks shy away from financing businesses like ours in these regions and they tag them as unstable markets. They believe that these regions do not meet desirable returns in terms of turnover, given the majority of the population in these areas are either low-income earners or do not earn any income at all. There's a lot of room for growth in Kakuma or Turkana as a whole. Today, Sunken Limited is producing 800 cookstoves a month and supplying almost 600 to 700 stores. We are not yet able to meet the target or our desired target in terms of production and also sales. This is because of the constraint in terms of our human capital and also production capacity that is restricted to the financial muscle that we have. Grants and low income or low interest loans also help us helps the business grow in this aspect. Kenya Climate Ventures has been a very big supporter of Sunken Limited, the Siemens Foundation, the Kenya Kakuma Challenge Fund has also been a very good platform for us in terms of scaling up the business.
Thank you once again to both Rebecca and Justice for the pre-recorded video. We have both Rebecca and Justice together here with us today. So if you have any questions for either Rebecca or Justice, please to type in the chat box and we will address them during the Q&A round. And also if you have any questions for Colin's presentation, please use the chat box and send us your questions. So moving forward, I would like to invite Carlin Groen from SNV. Carlin is the project advisor for the NDEF market-based energy access project. And today she's going to give us a case study from Kakuma and Kolebe. So Carlin, I see you have switched on your camera. I'm going to shortly send you a request. So you should now have a request to share your screen.
Yes, hi everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, full screen.
Full screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, good afternoon everyone. My name is Carlijn Groen and I work for SNV. SNV is an international development organization implementing various projects within the agro-food, water and energy space. And today I'll be talking about the energy projects that we are implementing under the Energizing Development Fund, Kakuma Refugee Camp and Columbia Integrated Settlement. And I'll primarily focus on our experiences with end user finance. So just to give you as a background, SNV has been implementing the NDEF market-based energy access project since 2017. We are focusing on promoting the market for solar and cookstoves through a market-based approach, both suitable products looking at households, micro-business and social institutions. And we do this through providing technical assistance and grant-based financial facilitation to solar and stove companies to enter the market and develop their distribution channels. And at the same time, we are raising awareness through community sensitization for the products that are coming in. Kakuma Refugee Camp and Columbia Integrated Settlement, which usually is referred to as one as Kakuma Refugee Camp, is located in Turkana. It's the same place actually where Sunken has their stove production unit. This production unit was initially set up by SNV in 2017 and has later been commercialized by Sunken and is also receiving continuous support through the technical assistance and financial facilitation. In Kakuma, there's about 200,000 refugees and 60,000 host community members. So besides the market-based energy access project, the last year, we've also done implementing a pilot with electric pressure cookers in Kalobie. Kalobie Village 1 in town has a solar mini-grid operated by Renewable Energy, which is currently providing access to about 500 customers. However, the mini-grid in one of the, so there's two mini-grids, one in Village 1 and one in Kakuma town. The one in the Village 1 has been expanded recently and has now the capacity to connect up to 3,000 customers, hence gives opportunity to scale. But initially the pilot was targeting about 500 customers. And so what we did is that we tested EBC with 20 end users. So for them, we distributed the EBC to really understand the end user experience and also electricity consumptions. And then also we did a commercial approach in which we had a private sector company actually sell up to 80 units using various payment models to really understand what can drive uptake. And at the same time, we conducted research on electricity consumption and end user experience. This was also done in partnership with CLASP. So the different payment models that we have tested in the commercial approach or commercial distribution were informed by research on access to financial services and income levels. And so this is what I wanted to share with you today a bit more on. Just to give you an indication about the type of cookstoves that are now available in the market in Kakuma due to the support through the market-based energy access product. So you can see a range of cookstoves, both locally produced These are on the bottom. As actually by Sunken, we have another partner as well who has set up their own local production unit. And then there's distributed that sell industrially manufactured stoves that are imported from Nairobi, usually burn stoves, biolite stoves. And so now there's a range of stoves available with different tiers and efficiency rates, but also really targeting different income levels as well, with different price ranges. And here you can see a market demonstration, which is part of the behavioral change campaign that we have been implementing to raise awareness, and which our private sector partners are also part of. To go back to the research on access to financial services and payment models, so what we find that in Kakuma, there's a range of financial service providers active in the regions, and they range from formality and regulation. So there's banks, KCB and Equity, for instance. They also provide actually bank services to the refugees to receive their cash-based incentives on. And so most of the refugees do actually have access to bank accounts. However, and here you can see it in the different in the schedule, is that they only have limited access to credit services, as often these require both a certain transaction history but also collateral, which both refugees and host community usually only have limited access to. And then there is only limited ways of having flexible payment plans to negotiate. Then there are SACCOs, which is similar to the banks in terms of access, mobile money services, which is very prevalent in Kenya, provided by Safaricom and Airtel. M-Pesa is the most known. They also provide a saving and payment platform. They also have certain credit services. However, refugee ID holders can only access usually SIM card for 3 months. And so they have to change it every 4 months, hence they're not eligible to access those credit services. And then what we see mostly is that they have self-organized community saving groups. So these are chamas and village savings and loan associations. These are self-organized and also often quite supported and sometimes set up by agencies as well. So it's basically that agencies, different humanitarian agencies, bring community members together, and they help them to set up a system, procedures, to kind of organize themselves, to start and have a saving group. And these are actually the primary providers for access to finance to host and refugee community because of the lower threshold to access to finance. And also what the benefit is there is that they're able to negotiate flexible payment plans. And so they're not as the loans, I would say, procedures are not as strict as for banks and SACCOs. However, those self-organized saving groups, they usually only provide loans for business purposes. Hence, in terms of accessing clean cook solutions, it doesn't always qualify. And so there some sensitization can be very important to drive the uptake for clean cooking products. Then in terms of payment models, and these are specifically for clean cooking, this analysis. So there are in general various payment models that can be applied to the distribution of cook stoves. So these are, I think we touched upon it in the last webinar. So these are cash and carry, and PAYGO, which is flexible installment fee for service, in which you pay an upfront payment and then you actually only pay for the service. Asset financing, this is when you pay, for instance, this is usually applied for LPG, and you pay for you get asset financing for the cylinder, but you still get the refills separately. And then utility-led financing, and this is usually deployed for utilities, for instance, mini electricity providers that can sell appliances to their customers and then actually deduct the payments from the utility bill. In terms of prevalence in Kakuma and Colombia, we mostly see cash and carry model applied, PAYGO as well. However, only limited to stoves, as there is not as much of an advanced PAYGO technologies as for solar. And so usually what we see with the companies that we support, that they do provide PAYGO or flexible installments options to the customer, but it's usually on an individual case-by-case basis, and it's not formalized in their structures. Fee for service, we don't see it in cookstoves. We have seen it now. There is one company that is installing component-based solar systems for a fee and then charges payments per energy kilowatt hour used. So that is upcoming, but not yet applied to cookstoves. Asset financing, we can't find. Same for utility-led financing. Then looking at income sources and levels, which vary heavily across host and refugee communities. The main source of income, according to our research, is cash-based assistance and in-kind donations provided by UNHCR and WFP. Other sources of income include incentive salaries. So for refugees, they don't have the formal right to work. However, you are able to provide them incentive. However, this is lower than, I would say, usual salary often, and so hence it's an incentive salary. Then also people have their own businesses, so they get earnings. Some people receive remittances from family, friends, relatives outside, and or other grants through humanitarian agencies. The average monthly income varies heavily from 144 euros in Kakuma town to 55 euros in Kakuma subcamps, Calabria town, and settlements. But again, this is a big average, and yeah, it really depends on a case by case, per family, per person, how much they earn, and it also fluctuates tremendously. So what we did for the pilot in terms of testing payment models, so we designed several payment models, which are actually only cash, and then 3 installment payment models in which the repayment period fluctuates. So we had a cash price, and then we had installment so we had a deposit, and then we had payback time of 4 weeks, 12 weeks, and 20 weeks. So we can really understand what do people prefer and what is their ability and willingness to pay. Here you see the total prices, which is on the high side, but this also really reflects actual market price. So it also includes markets for transport, as Turkana is quite remote, and so we have to add on those costs, LME margins, as to reflect cost of the last mile enterprises that also need their margins, and also marketing costs, because we really want to test what does it look like in an actual market setting. And then EPC units were pre-financed by the project, which hence enabled the partnering distributor to sell on credit, because usually it's a problem for them to buy the stock of 80 units at once. And this is because it's a pilot and we want to test. This was facilitated by the project. And then also good to mention that a discount was provided to customers participating in project research activities. So what we have seen, and so we just actually sold the distributor sold the last units, and though the sale started in May to October, and to just give you an indication, this is a completely new solution, the electric pressure cooker, to the region, and so we of course based the pilots on the previous pilots, but we hadn't introduced this solution yet in Kakuma or Calabria. I can talk a lot more about the way we approached it and the type of experience that we have and learnings, but I wanted to really focus on the payments or the financial aspects of the project. And so it was, we just took it out there. We designed the payment models, we raised the awareness, we went through community leaders, we did sensitization, end user training, looking at the end user, the after sales as well. But just looking at the payment models is that we saw that, as kind of expected, most people prefer the 20-week payment or the 12-week payment, so they can cut off the payments in smaller bits. So people are still repaying, so we don't have the final analysis yet. We do see that there is quite some high unpaid balances among the 20-week and 12-week repayments. Usually they start off paying back, but at some time, they stop paying back for various reasons. We are still following up also with a distributor because they are leading the recollection as well. And also we have another consultant that is looking at the analysis for this. So we don't have the full picture yet, but this is just an indication that although people prefer it, it does also have its risk. One thing that we also found that I did find relevant to mention here is that we initially also really wanted to target eateries because usually they have a bit more income to spend. However, because of the EPC size, which is 6 liters, which is also the common size available in Kenya, is not really found suitable for commercial use. And so, yeah, it wasn't really sold to use for business purposes, but mostly for households. So yeah, and as I said, we have the analysis is still in progress, and hopefully we'll be publishing the results next month to give you the full picture. Some key takeaways of our research and also the testing that we did for the EPCs, and also broader for market-based approaches to drive uptake for clean cooking in displacement setting, is that we really more and more learn about the importance of those informally organized saving groups, as access to those more formal access financial service providers is quite limited for both refugee and host community members because of the lack of having the Kenyan ID, but also a lack of collateral or transaction history. And so in terms of support, to businesses, I think capacity building of saving groups is quite important. So requires targeted sensitization approach to these saving groups on the benefits and opportunities for clean cooking to enhance uptake among their members. And so also really target them as a separate group. Long repayment periods are key to stimulate uptake high-tier cooking solutions, as we see with the EPCs. However, longer time does increase default risk, and therefore there really is a need for capacity building to distributors on conducting sound background checks on the borrower's financial ability to pay, a guarantor system, and repayment systems and procedures. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that, as I already mentioned, we'll have a key result and learnings report coming out next month on the e-cooking pilot. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carlene, for giving us a snapshot from Kenya. So now I'll switch back to my screen. So now from Kenya, we'd like to move to Rwanda to our colleague Anaslid Nanahimana from Practical Action. He's the senior renewable energy expert, and today he's going to give us a brief snapshot of the supply side interventions that was done during the RE4R project. So Anaslid, I'm going to send you a request to share your screen now, and if you could please switch on your video.
Thank you very much. Yes, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, please. Please, full screen mode, please.
Thank you. My name is Anakle Ndahimana. I'm the thematic lead Energy and Agriculture at Practical Action Rwanda. Practical Action is an international organization originating from the UK, which implements programs in Africa, Asia, Latin America, in themes related to renewable energies, agriculture, water and sanitation. So in Rwanda, in the context of humanitarian energy, we have implemented since 2018 to 2022 the renewable energy for refugee project, which was funded by the IKEA Foundation, with an approach to delivering market-based renewable energy investments in actually 3 camps of Rwanda. The camp of Gihembe, refugee camps, Gihembe, Kigeme, and Nyamete. Later, the refugee camp of Gihembe was relocated to another refugee camp. Actually, our approach was really to work around total energy access for households, for livelihood improvement and communities through supplying developing markets that supplies energy for households with a focus on solar home systems, clean cooking, working around productive use of energy with on-grid or mini-grids. With the community energy, we worked around solar street lights, but also we intended to develop mini-grids, which didn't happen because the on-grid electricity reached the 3 camps before we could actually work on mini-grids. We opted for other alternatives. So in Rwanda, in general, their policy is targeting reduced biomass usage. However, there is still challenges in terms of increased access to clean cookings, but there is a target with the biomass strategy to at least achieve a usage of 44%, reducing the use of unsustainable biomass to 42% by 2024. Again, this through the introduction of a mix of alternative fuels, which can be a combination of LPG, pellets, and others. Specifically to refugee camps. When we started the project in 2018, in 2017, the government had resolved to ban firewood usage from refugee camps due to the impact it had on forests and negative environmental impacts. On the other side, mostly tree-stone fires and the mud stove were the most used in the 3 refugee camps. So our intervention aimed at reducing the reliance and the expenditure on traditional fuel through market development approaches by engaging with the private sector actors to introduce sustainable biomass fuel. Through strengthening the demand and the supply side of the value chain. So we focus the 2 aspects, demand side, really creating market demand in refugee and host communities settings, but also strengthening the supply through working with the private company suppliers to strengthen the markets. This through engagement with the private sector suppliers, focused on addressing the barriers and enablers associated in on the access to market in and around the camps. This also involved tailored technical and financial support to facilitate supplier access to the market and building their long-term capacities. So how we managed to do this? We actually had an approach whereby our collaboration with the private sector focus on creating synergies that will actually empower their capabilities to deliver in the 2 settings, refugee and host communities. And we actually, our first engagement with the private sector was on informing local suppliers on opportunities in the camps, because it was for them an unknown market setup, sharing data and intervention objectives via open requests for proposals, and the suppliers use the information provided to design a proposal that would strengthen their market approach and submit it to us. The aim was to provide enough support in the course of the procurement phase to allow suppliers to establish their business models and together develop approaches that will help them de-risk key barriers while stimulating them to grow and becoming more financial viable in those markets set up. This was different to a standard procurement model and required us practical action to develop specific facilitation strategies and funding structures that was specific to each potential private sector partner. So the success relied on a close collaboration between ourselves and the suppliers, also during implementation, and being able to actually adapt to realities and changes while improving the business model or delivery models of different private sector actors. So under our intervention and our partnership with private companies, there are elements that could be eligible to funding from our end. We're talking about market activation, for example, awareness creation, or strengthening last mile distribution. For example, de-risking a company's investment by establishing outlets in the refugee camps. Reducing financial barriers for customers, working with private companies to be able to provide facilities to the end clients in terms of being able to, for example, to repay into installments. Reducing barriers to accessing the refugee camps, because it can be also one of the challenges, because this needs to be done in consultation, in agreement with the government, and who should provide the camp access permits, but also allowing them to actually access the camp at wide, helping the private sector to establish after-sales services systems, including also customer trainings and also collecting feedbacks on product improvements, providing technical and business capacities to the entrepreneurs. On the other end, we all worked also on increasing the production capacities of suppliers, because this can be, again, a challenge. Most of the fact, based on the fact that those suppliers might not be actually prepared for larger markets, especially local suppliers. Also improving the performance, continuously improving the performance of cooking solutions through continued market research, testing, but also product improvements. So the private sector investment co-sharing long-term gains were that our targeted investment with the private sector suppliers increased production capacities and provided room for suppliers to lower the costs for the end clients. There was sustained improvement in customer management and the provision of after-sales support, strengthened capacity within the camps for employees that included also refugees, while also allowing the private suppliers to commit to continue the operations in the refugee camps even beyond the project lifetime. As a concrete example, we worked with in the 3 refugee camps with 2 companies, Green and Rumori. We provided with the capacity co-shared towards establishing distribution networks in the camps, including agents and shops. At the end, we also supported them to expand.
Honestly, are you there? I think we lost your audio. Honestly, it seems like we lost his audio, so we'd give it a few more seconds for him to come back. Honestly, we can see the slides switching, but I think we lost your audio.
Especially with the behavior change communication, a lot of was done on awareness raising and behavior change communication. You see these crowds whereby we combine dramas and entertainment to provide also messages towards adoption of clean cooking technologies. This is an example of one of the outlets in the camps for in the refugee camps to easy access of customers to the private companies, but also this has served a lot in terms of after-sales services. This is an example of how we supported also increasing the production capacity for cookstoves, but also for pellets by really investing or co-sharing with the private companies on increasing the production capacities. Most importantly, we're talking about in the first phase of the private company offered the kind of tier 3 stoves. So we continuously worked with the companies to improving the products towards improving towards the tier 4 stoves, and also linking with this to research certification with the Rwanda Standard Board as well. So some of the key findings, especially in terms of challenges and solutions that were brought, I think there was a lot to do with refugee, especially, but also at white, the host communities' mindsets change. This in relation to adoption, but also moving to much more from free handouts, because before that, people were used to receiving goods for free. I think it was a good, we worked a lot on behavior change communication and awareness to really work on this element. We had challenges with convenience, with some of the very large families using big pots. So I think market adaptation, especially for private sector, is key with continuous research and development of new products. The other challenge in terms of repayment, because refugees would pay the stoves on a installment of 12 months, and they will be buying pellets on a mostly weekly basis. One of the issues was the refugees resettlement, moving from either other countries or returning back to their home countries. There was an issue with sustaining the contract they are done with with the private companies. So I think with this also it was we came up with kind of approach to negotiate with all partners involved, and if possible redefine the contract repayment terms. So these are some of the challenges and some of the solutions that are brought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annesley. I will now switch back to my screen. So back to you, our dear audience. If you have questions, please use the chat box and send us the questions, as we will now move to the Q&A round. But before I move to the Q&A round, today we heard a lot about different types of de-risking mechanisms. So I have another poll for you that should pop up in your screen now. So based on what we have heard in different presentations, which one do you think is the most efficient or supporting mechanism for promoting market growth? Again, we have a range of options, so we want to see how does your answer changes based on what we discussed today. So in the meantime, I'll request all my panelists to get ready for Q&A round, and to my audience again, please use the chat box and send us all your questions. And please do tell us to whom the question is addressed to also. So since the answers are coming in, let's give the answers another few 20 seconds more, and then I'll close the poll. And another 10 more seconds. So if you haven't voted, please vote, as they say, last chance to vote. And I will close the poll in another few more seconds. So now I'll close the poll and display the results. So I think the winners haven't changed, in the sense that we had reserve-based financing as the top in previously too, but we do have grant and subsidies with higher percentage. So thank you again for everyone for voting. And now we move to the Q&A round. So if all my speakers could switch on their camera, we could then move on to the Q&A round. Thank you so much. So yes, perfect. So again, please use the chat box, send us your questions. We do have some questions coming in. So without further ado, I would like to start the Q&A round with, maybe I start with Rebecca and Justice, as you both are representing private companies today on the panel, and you both presented different options for de-risking. So my question to you is, if you were given an option to design an ideal mechanism that you think would support the private sector, what would that be? And where do you think the support should go in? For example, early product development or research and development, subsidizing the price, and so on. So maybe, Rebecca, we start with you, and then we go to Justice.
Thank you so much, Wanisha. I think this is a very good question, but speaking from the private sector experience, I think a mechanism that can actually be able to support the private sector that is attractive enough that if they invested in these displacement markets, displacement places, they are still able to make a profit, or they're still able to get returns on their investment, would be something that I would go for if I was designing a mechanism that is finance-based. Then the other most important thing is to always look at it in a market-based approach. Because if you're having two contradicting mechanisms, for example, financing the end users on the other side, it becomes very challenging. Because when that financing stops, then what? It's better to finance the private sector so that the prices of the products are not tampered with. Then also, if you asked me what would be the best thing to invest in to help the private sector take over this market, is first of all make these places accessible for them. For example, the camps, not everybody is accepted to go in there. So if it's accessible for them to penetrate these places, that is the first way to go. And then the second way, in my opinion, is to make sure that there is available market assessment information for the private sector. If maybe there is an entity that can invest in having the local market situation revealed to the private sector, then they know what strategies they need to actually go and penetrate these markets. And then finally, it would be nice to support the private sector in understanding what products are best for certain markets. So investing in R&D to bring up to standard the products of the private sector, and in the context of the cultures in these different refugee settings. Go. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Then we move to you, Justice.
From my end, I think going by what we have experienced and learned in our time in Kakuma, then a combination of either low interest loans and also grants go a long way in having a stable and more sustainable business model or business in the region. When you look at most of the businesses that have been financed in Kakuma through maybe having things like subsidies or grants, as long as that dries out, they fold up and also leave, because you don't get to do many sales in these regions, especially when your product is very expensive or not within majority of the population in these areas. So when you have a business where you depend on either subsidizing your product for you to penetrate the market, then it becomes difficult for you to maintain that market or grow your market in the long run. And what we have learned also is that even if giving grants, the grants needs to be tied to maybe some goals or targets in terms of the number or data that is required by either the donor or the financier. So when this happens also, it gives more motivation, or it keeps the business in a position where it needs to deliver. And by also trying to reach this target, they also expand their product range or also reach in the long run. And for marginalized regions also, for a business to maintain that presence in this region, the community through where it works also needs to also have some more empowerment. The reason why you find some or most of the businesses in marginalized region, Kakuma being a good example here, is when a business comes with a product that either is not known in this region or is unique in terms of usage, then for that market to also buy into it, because either of exposure or literacy and even financial muscles, it is difficult for you when you're spending more money in this for your marketing. So giving more in terms of identifying the right product for the market and pushing it, because as that connects to the market is very key when also for you to survive in these markets. So I think that going currently for marginalized regions, I think grants and low interest loans go a long way, at least for us.
Thank you so much, Justice. And building on some of the points that Revik and Justice mentioned, maybe I want to move to you, Annesley. So in your project, you had also had camp facilitation where you tried to support the private sector. So maybe there you could explain a bit more about how was the process like to get the private sector into the displaced setting. I mean, you touched upon this in your presentation, but if you could say a bit more on that, that would be really great. And then I have a follow-up question after that. You are muted.
Thank you very much. I think it's true. Refugee camps are not usually very accessible to the private sector, unless if it's in a defined framework. In the context of our project, we had an agreement with the ministry in charge of refugees that opened up room for our partner companies to get camp access permits. Usually it will be easier to work outside of the camps as well, because we are here talking about developing markets in refugee camps, but also in host communities. Now the approach is really, the governmental push is having integration between refugees and host communities. Host communities, usually it's not very complicated, but also it's good also to have good collaboration with local leaders around the camps as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then the second question was, is in your project specifically, was there any preset targets with the companies that you supported, the two companies that you mentioned?
We had 3 camps. We wanted to start relatively small, but on the other side, we had certain criteria. As I said about co-designing the intervention together with private sector actors who had shared their proposals. So we had to look into what type of products they're offering, the affordability of products, and we ended up with 2 companies because they are closer to the possibility to a good offer to refugees. But I think for your information now, we are going to expand to all the 5 refugee camps. I think it will again be a room to open up to more companies, but the key point was companies that would provide good services, good products, and affordable products to refugees, looking at also the purchasing power in and around the camps.
So there was no
Thank you.
pre-agreed targets on X number of units. It was more based on understanding of the market.
We wanted to reach a certain camp level access share of 60% in the first phase. We managed to get up to 50% for the 3 camps, which actually was translated into 4,500 stoves. Now with the new project, we have a target of 80% access for all the camps. Also important to say that markets don't work for all the refugees. There is a certain segment of refugees which can be defined as the most vulnerable. In this context, again, you need to define other market terms that might allow increased access also to this segment of population as well, which means for them it can be higher subsidy introduction.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
So now from Rwanda to Kenya to Kalin. So I have 2 questions for you. The first one is with the EPC, the test that you made, did you also look at if EPCs, the electric pressure cooker, had any reduced cooking time compared to the conventional method of cooking in Kakuma? And if yes, if you could share some results on that.
Yeah, for sure. Let me expand a bit on what we did in terms of the research. Yeah, I didn't want to focus too much time on that in the presentation. But basically what we did is that we have tracked 40 end users, so 20 of the group in which we did the initial testing, and then 20 customers that actually paid for the EPC, which is among this group of the 80. What we did for them is that we tracked both the electricity consumption from the mini grids, as we also really wanted to understand to what extent is electricity consumption impacted, because this also says something, of course, well, both about the cost for cooking, but also about mini grid demand stimulation and the potential of EPCs to increase that. So that's one side, or the more the technical side, and then on the other side, we really look at end user experience. So we did a baseline study looking at the initial cooking practices. So in Kalobie, this is all biomass cooking, so it's either firewood or charcoal. Most of the end users, they use open fires, or they have either charcoal stove and or firewood stoves with various efficiency levels. So they do stove stacking. Also good to mention that in Kakuma, most of the refugees have to pay for firewood or charcoal. So this is not either freely distributed, or they can't. Well, they're not formally legally allowed to collect in the neighborhood. And so this is, I would say, an advantage of introducing a product like electric cooking, as you don't have to compete with free as can be in other areas. So what we did then is, once the EPCs were either distributed or sold, we did frequent bi-weekly surveys to understand what is the impact that the EPC makes in comparison to the previous cooking practices. So let me very quickly pull up so I'm not stating anything wrong. So these are preliminary findings. As I said, we did this bi-weekly surveys, and then we did an end line. And so we're still analyzing the end line. So these are the preliminary findings. So what we saw is that most of the users cook with EPC 2 times a day. And so this makes it the primary cooking fuel. And today we can safely say at this point they have transitions their primary fuel from firewood or charcoal to electricity. They report fuel savings of about €2 per week, which is 250 Kenyan shillings, and also water savings. This is something that we did not necessarily anticipate initially, but it is a very I would say positive benefit, as water is quite a scarce good in the area. And this is because with an EPC, especially if you cook with a closed lid, which is mostly common, you save so much more water, as it's more efficient and insulated than if you're cooking on an open fire or another biomass stove. So these are some of the preliminary findings that we found. And the fact that 80 people did pay for the product, it also shows a good product market fit, however, mostly for households. As I already mentioned, we did find that eateries were not so much interested in buying and using the EPC for commercial purposes because of the size of the EPC. And we do see the same for large households. So this is a learning that we have, and hopefully we'll get more units in the Kenyan markets with larger sizes, so they can also really meet those cooking needs.
Thank you so much, Carlene. Then from Kenya, we move over to US, to Colum. So we have the whole world in today in the panel with us. So Colum, in your presentation, you talked about result-based financing, and you also mentioned that if you connect result-based financing only with direct sales, there is also possibility of market distortion. And in many of the presentation from Rebecca and Zeshtin, the repayment or default payment was also something that was touched quite often. So I wanted to ask you if you have come across any RBF schemes that support companies look at not only sales unit or sales volume as an indicator, but somehow also incorporate the repayment schemes or the installment payment of the customers. If not, any thoughts on how such a system could be designed based on experience?
Yeah, so not something that I've come across directly. I mean, I think to some extent, one of the principles of an RBF program is that the the funder that or the payer that is setting the targets and the objectives doesn't care how that money is used. That payment may be used to offset defaults. It could be put into a fund by the company to offset defaults. It could be used to improve the targeting of solutions to ensure that there's the least likelihood of default. So to some extent, I think the payers can be agnostic of how the results are achieved. There are some RBF programs out there that explicitly cater for pay-as-you-go business models, although actually the incentive is maybe the other way around, to ensure that payments are made once customers have achieved a certain period of usage or a certain level of repayment. I think certainly there could be opportunities to combine an RBF program with some sort of guarantee fund that would protect against default. But of course, one of the risks there is that if you are being incentivized for every solution that you distribute to a household, and you have an insurance against that household defaulting, there's potentially a perverse incentive there, or a risk of what an economist would call moral hazard, where you might be encouraging households to become over-indebted and providing those solutions and the associated installment plans to households that really just can't afford it, and so are not appropriate targets for that kind of a model. So I think it's not without its risks. But maybe there's some potential there to combine those programs, as long as there's that the implementers are aware of those risks of over indebtedness. I think that's something that's become quite a topical issue in the off-grid solar space. Google just recently announced some consumer protection principles that try to ensure that there's a code of conduct or standards against that, and that's something that we're looking at in clean cooking as well. But yeah, it's kind of a complex landscape. And again, I think like in many of the examples that we've heard, this is also context dependent, and it's hard to say that this is the right combination for any given scenario. And I'm sure all the other panelists will sort of concur with that the context really is very crucial here to understand.
Thank you so much. I do have a second question for you. So when talking about carbon finance options, so the question is, who owns the carbon credit? Is it the project who implementing it, or is it the donor who provided that financing to facilitate and everything?
So it varies again with context. I think one of the RBF programs that maybe most people are familiar with in clean cooking is the World Bank Clean Cooking Fund in Rwanda, which actually I should have clarified in this in my remarks. That actually is providing a subsidy to based on the household's income level. But in that scenario, the carbon credits that are generated from households that wouldn't otherwise be using a clean cook stove are retained by the government of Rwanda in this case, and the revenues from those carbon credits are recirculated back into the RBF fund too. So it's sort of a revolving fund that is financed by the carbon revenues that come from the project. So that's one example. In other cases, the carbon credits may be entirely the business of the company that is providing the stoves. But I think as more governments are getting involved in supporting RBF programs, and those governments are required to deliver on their nationally determined contributions, I think there's going to be more interest in how do we kind of use these types of programs to generate carbon credits that can contribute to those sort of national level NDCs. So I think we'll see more complex structures, maybe similar to the Rwanda example coming up in the future.
Thank you so much. So now the next question goes to Colin and Anaslit, and because we are so low on time, so short and sweet answer would be appreciated. So the question to both of you is, based on this project and based on all your learnings, so how would you do differently if you were doing similar projects in future? What is one thing that you have learned from this current project that you did that you would like to take in future? What would you do differently if given a chance to do something similar again? So I see both of you are thinking, so maybe Anaslit, we start with you.
Yeah, I think also I think we have seen a number of operational challenges with the private companies. I think it's also good to not truly have full confidence on private company delivery, especially local companies. I think going with them into a medium-term journey is important in terms also of making sure that there is accompanying measures and capacity building, not only for the technologies, but also for the operational management. I think it's having an emphasis on the capacity development for partner private companies. We also work with solar companies, which seems to be much more advanced in terms of products and capacities. I think it's a good emphasis. Second, I think also there is a lot to do in terms of behavior change. So something I will do differently and put much more investment really in terms of behavior change, not only for adoption, but also for continued usage, making sure that there is a good uptake and there is continuous uptake over time. I think also invest in terms of users training, after sales services, much more than we had anticipated. So I think the two aspects plus a third one in terms of continued research, which will actually lead to improved, much more efficient products, but also which again links up to much more affordable products, because sometimes high efficiency means increase of cost. So really working around those two aspects so that refugees and host communities can get improved product at relatively affordable costs. So those are the three things I'll continue investing on. Thank you.
Perfect. Over to you, Colin.
Yeah, thanks. I think borrowing on that answer, I mean, there's many things that you would always maybe do differently, or you learn along the way that you would have liked to implement from the start. But so I'll just highlight. I would say we were very focused initially on supply. So making sure that the solutions come into the markets. And we really learned with cooking, it's not only about supply, it's also, of course, about awareness creation, which we did, but we just had mostly had it through the companies themselves. So they did their marketing activities. But we really found that there needs to be broader awareness and even behavioral change in terms of cooking, because it's not just about knowing that the product's in the market, but it's also for people to translate it to their own situations. Cooking is a very fundamental behavior, and it's not like solar that it's more clear what the direct benefits you are. With cooking, it's about knowing what are the negative impacts that they have on your health, on the environment, on your cooking time. Many aspects that people are not necessarily always aware of, and also not aware of the benefits that moving to a more efficient cook stove or a different fuel or etc. can bring to you directly. I think within the sector this is more and more known, but it's something that is really crucial also when deploying a market-based approach, that you don't forget about that behavioral aspect, which I think it's not something that a company necessarily can do by themselves through their usual marketing practices. There is more targeted awareness necessary there, using different actors, community leaders, different channels that really speak the language of people as well. So that's one thing I would say that we brought in later, and we're still bringing in, and we're still changing and learning. But this is something that I would really emphasize on, that it would be really good to focus on from the start.
Thank you so much, Kalim. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of the Q&A round. We had a lovely discussion and we touched upon a lot of things. And I think a quick summary again for the whole cooking sector would be, again, context matters. I think that we heard in different, whether we talk about repeatability, context, and customization matter. So with that, I would like to thank all the speakers for your wonderful presentation and all your inputs during the Q&A round. A huge thank you to all the audience for staying with us towards the end. As usual, you can send us all your feedback at info@energypedia.info. The recordings from today will be available at the link that's shown on your screen and also dropped in the chat. We'll also send you an email, a follow-up email tomorrow with the video recording. And once we close the webinar, a survey will pop up. So please take the survey and let us know how we could improve the webinar, or what other suggestions do you have for us. So with that, a huge thank you to everyone, and have a good day, and bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you so much.